Would you rise, please? Please be seated. So we've had take a motion to reconvene an open session moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Erb. All those in favor? That is carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we have a wonderful way to start out this morning. I'd like this evening. It's just been an endless day. Where else can you have this kind of fun? Yes, this evening, I'd like to call upon Albert Hovingh and Shelly Candel, as well as Clara Lachman. Albert is going to do Shelly and produce an overview of the Region of Waterloo's application process, including the timeline and the team involved in order to be a B region with B cities. Welcome. You probably guessed this is Albert.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chair Redmond. So if I can get the slides up. There we go. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Shelly and Clara this evening. And as the chair said before that, I'm just going to give you a bit of a how we got here. So in the fall of 2019, Regional Council passed a motion to pursue designation as the first B region in Canada. With a growing awareness and interest in pollinators and the desire to ensure their continued well-being in the region, Council did pass that motion. And as part of the application, we indicated that the Region of Waterloo will be able to establish a core group of individuals whose mandate will be to provide leadership to our local municipalities, local communities, so that's neighborhoods, schools, faith communities, and individuals who are interested in learning more about pollinators, as well as becoming involved in hands-on projects. So in the region already before that, there had been some municipalities and institutions that were designated by B City Canada. And the feeling was that if the entire region was designated as a B region, we could develop partnerships and projects under a larger B umbrella. I don't know if there's a B umbrella, but that's what we're going with. So the City of Kitchener was designated, the City of Waterloo, Wellesley Township, and Wilfrid Laurier University. So they all had achieved designations already. But again, we sort of combined everything and we applied for the B region designation. And then over the years, we've funded a number of projects under the Community Environmental Fund that dealt with pollinators. So just some examples of them. Cambridge Pollinator Reserve, Wellesley Township Bee City Project, Central Frederick Neighborhood Pollinator Garden, University Downs Neighborhood Pollinator Garden, Iron Horse Trail Pollinator Pathway, Meadow Lane Park Pollinator Patch, KW Urban Harvesters Pollinator Garden, and WLU Building for Bees and Pollination, and Clara is part of that group. Reap Green Solutions, Bloomin' Box Garden Kits. One thing you notice with all these pollinator projects, they love bee puns and things like that, and bloomin' and stuff like that. So it's all there. And more. So there's a lot of interest in this, as I said, which was part of the reason for pursuing this designation. And as part of the application, we sort of stressed the encouraging and supporting. So some of the things that we would be looking at is pollinator garden and habitat restoration projects, education on the importance of pollinators, and the introduction and maintenance of pesticide-free pollinator-friendly landscaping. We have formed a coordinating committee. So that's myself. There's a representative from the City of Kitchener, Waterloo, and a volunteer from the township, from Wellesley Township. So we're working on providing this umbrella piece and disseminating outward. So we're working on developing educational resources or providing access to people who are interested in these sorts of projects, sharing local expertise, and planning events. And one example is that the third week of June, there is a pollinator week planned already. And so that's something that will be moving around the region. So currently it's in Waterloo this year, but that will be moving around the region and getting everybody interested and involved. So that's enough from me. So I'll now call up Shelly, and she'll make a presentation. And I think Clara's also got something to present. Thank you.
Welcome, Shelly.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm so honored to be here today. And it is quite an honor to, I have with me the declaration declaring the region of Waterloo the first bee region in Canada to go along with the 39 other bee cities across Canada. And in fact, since this designation, the city of Montreal approached me and wondered if they too could become a bee city because there's 18 boroughs. And I said, well, we've done this in Waterloo. I'm sure we could do that in Montreal. And then this week, another call from the county, from Simcoe County. So another county that wants to be the first county. So look what you've started. So congratulations. So some other gifts I have are these little handmade little bees for all the councillors. I want to thank all of you so much for the commitment that the region will commit to. Another little gift I have is, so you just don't think there's just a honeybee, but there's many different kinds of bee species here. Probably in this region, maybe around 300. So on the renewal, I may test some of you, but until then, you can study all the different species of bees. As well, for your own gardens, I have a little book that you might want to share with each other about Feed the Bees and the different plants that you can plant. And I'm really also honored here to have Clara Lachman with me. Lachman, sorry, pronounced it wrong. She's with the university, and it's great here to have the young university students. She's a business student, but she's also very involved and engaged in pollinators. So let me introduce her.
Welcome, Clara.
Hello, and thank you, Shelly, for the kind introduction, and to the region of Waterloo for inviting me today to participate in this first bee region designation. My name is Clara, and I'm currently one of the enterprise managers of PolliNation, which is a social venture under Enactus Laurier based out of Wilfrid Laurier University. It is our mandate as a collective to raise awareness about the pollinator crisis, and the way that we have been doing so within our local community is by producing our very own bee houses. Specifically, these bee houses do target native mason bee species by providing them with the optimal nesting conditions to support their reproductive activity during pollinator season. And from the sale of all of our bee kits, we have developed our own Bee Leaders of Tomorrow curriculum, which is an educational program in which our team of very passionate and enthusiastic students, we go into different elementary and high school classrooms and to teach the youth of tomorrow about the bee decline issue and how they can be a change maker within their own community. As part of Wilfrid Laurier University, we were very pleased and excited to be designated as a bee campus. And even being here today is super amazing to share with everyone here all of the collective efforts in us together universally in helping protect and save these very important pollinators. And on behalf of my team at PolliNation, I would like to officially present the region of Waterloo with their own PolliNation bee kit as a token of our appreciation.
So Clara, that's wonderful, and I will accept it on behalf of the region, but you talked about proceeds, so I'm assuming they're for sale. Where do we go if we want to all of a sudden put in a whole bunch of orders and order them?
That's a great question. So currently we have been pursuing the B2C, so going to different local markets such as St. Jacob's Market and the Kitchener Market, Cambridge as well, and engaging with the community members and selling it directly to them. We do have a website in which we update all of the local markets that we will be attending, so checking up frequently on that page, we always post updates.
Thank you. So we can all just go to our local markets and buy a bee house.
And for anyone who is interested in learning more about our enterprise, we can be found at Enactus PolliNation.com, and we will be posting updates about where all of you can purchase your own bee houses.
And as I was saying before we got started with your presentation, you know, this is really something that we do for those who come after, for our children and our grandchildren. And my grandkids were really impressed that we did this. So I think this feels like a photo op. Thank you all very much. I'm going to come down and we'll take a picture.
Thank you.
Hang on. Elizabeth Clark has a question first. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Sorry, I do have a question. And I'm obviously a bee ignorant person. So how does a bee house differ from a beehive?
So with this bee house in particular, the purpose of it is to provide, in our case, mason bees with the optimal nesting conditions. So during the pollinator season, the mason bees, they lay their eggs in the little holes inside of our bee house. And then they do hibernate all throughout winter. And then for the next following spring season, once the temperatures do warm up, the eggs do hatch and the pollinator cycle just repeats itself.
So we can't get honey out of that?
No, not with mason bees.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I always find that the Cambridge Pollinator Preserve a very good place to be. No pun intended. And I'm very excited about the work that you've been doing. I was a former Minister of Natural Resources for the province of Ontario, and our government and our ministry at that time was identifying about 1 million acres of bee pollinator land in the province of Ontario. So I'm excited about this. And people have asked me, and I'm just asking you, are there resources that you have in your organization that would allow homeowners and people that are putting in gardens to access resources in order to sort of make a bee pollinator garden?
Yes, so actually our amazing team has developed a resource guide for anyone interested in learning about the different plants that they can plant in their gardens to really provide the optimal environment for these different pollinator species, as well as our resource guide does go through all the maintenance and cleaning requirements of maintaining these bee kits to ensure that they do provide the proper nesting for these pollinator species.
Thank you. And if I could, Madam Chair, for a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
And the other question I had was I was totally amazed about the number of species of bees that are there and their names. They're pretty creative. But are there particular bee species that you find are more important than others and can sort of direct those resources to the homeowner on how to plant for those particular species?
So with our bee house in particular, the reason why we chose to primarily focus on mason bees is because they are native to this area. They are solitary pollinators, which means that they are cross-pollinators. So they are responsible for so much of the food that we consume, and we wanted to give back and to thank them for all the work that they do for us by creating the optimal living conditions for them. Obviously, we do hope to raise awareness about different pollinators, and that is something that we are thinking about providing resources for in the future as well for anyone who's interested.
That's great information. Thank you very much.
Councillor Nowak.
Yes, and am I on?
You're on.
Thank you for the presentation, and it's very timely. I think I just recently received, or through the Good Roads Milestones magazine, there was an article in there written by Kathleen Law, who was an integrated conservation manager, Pollinator Partnership Canada, and it talks about a situation in Lanark County where they were having a problem with an infestation of parsnip infestation. But they asked themselves, some questions about how they were going to deal with this. And one of the things that they did is the parsnip infestation was along the roadways, along the highways. So they asked, they decided that roads connect people and places and goods and services to each other, but what if these roads could also provide an ecosystem, contribute to environmental conservation, create a sense of place, and provide beauty and landscape? What if they could do this while also reducing maintenance costs, carbon emissions, snowdrift erosion, stormwater issues, and the encroachment of invasive species? So they went forward with what they called an integrated roadside vegetation management plan. And according to this article, it's been very successful. Now, I passed this information on to to Mr. Schmidt over here, and also to Chair Redmond, and I'm hoping that the staff here will have a close look at this report and see if there isn't something that we can't do with regard to implementing something similar. It's proven effective here, and no reason why in Lanark, so there's no reason why it can't be proven effective here. So that would be one more thing that I think we could look at.
Thank you, Councillor Nowak. Now, I see no other speakers, so I will come for the photo op.
Could you give the councillors one? I have to take a picture first. Okay, that's fine. And then just stand them so. Thank you. And everybody got it. Okay.
Now, I want to point out that you're all welcome to stay, but if you don't, we understand. No, I'm talking to the B people. Councillors have to stay. At our committee day, there was a request by council that we have an update on COVID-19. I think it was called coronavirus at the time, but it's been updated now. And I think it's now received the status by the WHO of being a pandemic as well. So clearly this is something that is evolving as it goes. And I'm going to ask Mr. Murray to start and then Dr. Wang to continue.
Madam Chair.
Oh, hang on.
Madam Chair, I know there's at least one person in the audience is waiting for us to deal with the recommendation from committee. I'm just wondering if we can deal with the committee reports first, and then we can go into the pandemic. So if people in the audience are here for something specific.
We have delegations that are waiting to hear this information too.
We have delegations?
Yes, we do. People that have just registered tonight. Do you want to bring forward the one recommendation?
Well, the one recommendation I know for sure is from Planning and Works with respect to one properties, and then the amendment tonight.
Okay, we can do that. Councillor Galloway?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll bring forward the recommendation as it relates to on properties. There is, however, a minor change, relatively minor change to the recommendation that is contained in your consolidated agenda. Does not really change the substance of the matter, and I believe the mover and the seconder of the original motion at Tuesday's meeting last week have approved of this change. Yeah, that's right. So I'll make the recommendation as per page 4 of the consolidated agenda as it relates to one properties.
Okay. Councillor Strickland, would you like to second that? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you, Councillor Strickland, for pointing that out. We're now going to go to Mr. Murray and then Dr. Wang to have a presentation on COVID-19. Mr. Murray?
Yep. I'll just wait for Van to put the presentation back. Okay. And so I've got a couple of slides to lead off, and Hsiu-Li, I think, is going to advance those slides. So what I wanted to, and I emailed council about this a day or two ago and said Dr. Wang was going to provide an update on COVID-19 and that we were convening the pandemic control group and that I would provide an update on the membership and roles on the pandemic control group. So in a complex sort of emergency, a complex kind of community issue like pandemic, one of the ongoing challenges is how to coordinate amongst many organizations that are potentially involved and potentially affected. So years ago, I'm going to say about 50 different community groups worked together to develop a pandemic response plan for Waterloo Region. That was endorsed by Regional Council back in the day. And so, as we're confronted by what is now a pandemic, the regional staff dusted this off. Many of our community partners have dusted it off and have adopted the overall structure that was endorsed by those dozens of community partners back when that plan was prepared. And the structure that you see here, it recognizes that there's a health dimension to a pandemic issue, there's an emergency dimension. It also recognizes that there's a federal dimension, a provincial dimension, and a local dimension. And that we receive direction from federal health and emergency agencies, we receive direction from provincial health and emergency agencies, and as a community, we need to organize ourselves to deal with and respond to that. The basic structure is built on the region's emergency response plan. And in the region's emergency response plan, there is typically a control group, an emergency control group. The emergency control group is chaired by myself as region CAO. It includes the regional chair, and it includes the mayors and CAOs of the affected municipalities. So in a situation like this that affects all of the area municipalities, the control group includes myself, the regional chair, the mayors and CAOs of all the affected municipalities, so in this case, all of them. It also includes police chief, paramedic services chief, regional fire coordinator, and the response has been structured based on a number of control groups. So we have health sector control group, critical infrastructure control group, community support control group, and a communications control group. And the chairs of each of those control groups are also on the pandemic control group. Each agency, so the region, each area municipality, and all of our community partners, hospitals, school boards, universities, the list goes on, are all responsible for their own operations and their own governing bodies. So in this case, Regional Council is responsible for the region's role in dealing with a pandemic response. Each of the area municipalities has a role, hospitals do, primary care does. And this structure is an attempt to provide some overall coordination and facilitation to ensure that all of the community partners are working well together and closely together. So Hsiu-Li, if you just go to the next slide, this just gives a kind of an overview of, so what are the overall roles of that control group? And you see, largely it's a liaison, coordination, facilitation role between a number of community partners. Hsiu-Li is going to go into some detail about the health sector control group because that's sort of the focal point right now. But that overall pandemic control group is trying to provide liaison between many different organizations and sectors to try to coordinate a community-wide preparedness and response, facilitate information sharing and communication between the region, area municipalities, hospitals, primary care, school boards, universities, and others, private sector, facilitate sharing of resources if that's required between all of those community partners, and liaison with those sector control groups, either asking them to take action or receiving requests from them to the region or area municipalities for any of the municipal agencies to assist any of those sector control groups. So that just gives you a little sense of kind of how the response is structured based on both the region's emergency response plan and the pandemic plan. And Hsiu-Li, I think the next slide is, so then I'm going to turn it over to Hsiu-Li, who has a really substantive update based on the work that the health sector control group is doing. So I'll turn it over to Hsiu-Li, and then we'll do questions at the end.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors.
Sorry, Dr. Wang, just before you start, I just want to let the delegations know that this will be posted tomorrow morning, and as soon as we can get the webcast up, we will get it up, so don't feel like you have to write all of this down. It will all be in the public domain. Councillor Strickland, do you want to speak now, or do you want to wait till
A quick question.
Yep.
So thanks. And Mr. Murray, if you go back to the first slide, the org chart, if you would, please. So I know we really want to hear from Dr. Wang, but just on this org chart, and I understand there's a lot of moving pieces, the most important thing is that as a community, we get this right and that the communication's happening appropriately and there's protocols adhered to so the public's well informed and we can do the best we can to contain the spread of this virus. But I'm just wondering, and I don't expect an answer tonight, and I know this report was done in 2008. Yep. So the one thing that's missing on this to me is the role of this body as the Public Health Board. So somehow the Public Health Board needs to be integrated into this org chart. I don't need an answer tonight, but that needs to be included. So I'll leave that with you and the rest of the team.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Strickland. Dr. Wang.
Thank you. So good evening, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on COVID-19 or novel coronavirus. So tonight, I'd like to talk to you about the current status of COVID-19, what we're currently doing to respond, and how we're working to be prepared for what might come in the future. And finally, I'll end with some key public health recommendations. So current status. So I'll start with some commonly asked questions about COVID-19. First, what is COVID-19? It is a virus that is a new virus for the world. We haven't seen it before, but it belongs to a family of viruses known as coronaviruses. And we have seen other coronaviruses before, such as the common cold. That's a coronavirus. And SARS was also a coronavirus. So they're all part of a family of viruses, but they're all slightly different. So how severe is COVID-19? About 80% of the cases have a milder form of illness. The rest have more serious illness and can require hospitalization or critical care. Those most at risk for serious illness, complications, and death are those over the age of 65 and with underlying medical conditions. Children generally experience mild symptoms only. What are the symptoms? How is it spread? So the most common symptoms are fever, cough, and then people can also have difficulty breathing. And for the minority of cases that I discussed who have more severe manifestations, they can have things like pneumonia, respiratory failure, kidney failure, and death. Again, mostly among those with underlying conditions who are older. How is it spread? It primarily spreads through direct and close contact with what are called respiratory droplets. So when somebody sneezes or coughs, little respiratory secretions that are sent out, and then a person that's close by breathes it in. So that's sort of the mechanism that is most of the time how the illness is transmitted. There can be some transmission through surfaces. So for example, if someone coughs and sneezes on a surface and someone else puts their hand on it and then puts their hand on their face or mouth, it can transmit that way as well. Although it's more likely to transmit through direct person-to-person contact than through the environmental route. But regardless, it's something that can happen, and so we have recommendations for that as well. And so based on what we've seen so far, the way it's spread is similar to the flu and other respiratory viruses. And finally, how long after you've been exposed can you develop symptoms? Well, in general, it's about averaging 5 to 6 days, but you can develop it as early as 2 days after you've been exposed, up to 14 days after you've been exposed. So this is the global situation, and as you can see by the map, it is not unexpected that the WHO has declared this today a pandemic. So what does pandemic mean? It just means that there's been widespread global spread of this illness. It is not an indication that it is necessarily going to be very severe, just that it is very widespread across the world. So in Canada, cases have been increasing. Most have had mild illness. There hasn't been to date wide community spread, but we are starting to see a little bit of that in British Columbia, for example. So the current response, what are we doing currently? First, I want to talk a little bit about the different levels of health authorities that are responding to this pandemic. At the federal level, there's the Public Health Agency of Canada that provides advice for the entire country. At the provincial level, there's the Ontario Ministry of Health, and they have an expert body called Public Health Ontario that provides them expert advice. Recently, there's been a table set up at the very large regional level called Ontario West. So Ontario Health, as you may remember, was an agency that was formed after the LHINs were sort of dissolved, and it became Ontario Health. And so Ontario Health has 5 large regional arms, and the one that we're in is called Ontario Health West. So that spans a geography from Grey Bruce in the north to Niagara in the south, Windsor in the east to Wellington, Guelph in the west. So it's a big geography. It's being led by Bruce Lochner, whom some of you may remember was the CEO of the Waterloo Wellington LHIN. And that table has been set up, and it is providing a direction to healthcare organizations in their geography, including in Waterloo Region. And in Waterloo Region, we have our local healthcare partners, and I'll go into that a little more detail in the next slide. So just wanted to let you know, there are recommendations that are coming down from multiple levels, and there are multiple levels to which we, as local public health, have to report up into. So local agencies, health agencies in particular, there are many healthcare partners that we're working with, but I want to emphasize tonight 3 primary groups that are responding to coronavirus. First, the hospitals. The hospitals have been doing a lot of work with respect to this. You may have heard that hospitals are doing the bulk of the testing for cases that may have coronavirus. And that's because of the very stringent requirements that the Ministry of Health has put in place for assessment and testing of suspect cases, and therefore hospitals, were primarily the body equipped to do that. But with the expansion of the areas around the globe that are affected and the advice for more and more travelers to, self-monitor and call public health if they have symptoms and potentially then be referred to testing, this is obviously putting a load on hospitals. And so hospitals and public health and primary care groups like the ones associated with the Ontario health teams that have been, recently formed, we're getting together to try to work on solutions to have what's called community assessment centers, where primary care physicians, for example, can see patients who have milder symptoms and who don't need to go to a hospital to be assessed. Now, that said, we're also working with the ministry in order to ensure that, given their very stringent criteria, we're going to be able to put these assessment centers up. And we understand that, as we learn more about the illness and we learn more about how it spread, they're going to be updating their requirements such that we should be able to have these centers in the future. So that's going to help with the overall health system capacity to be able to assess people who have come back from places, where there's a lot of activity. So, and I finally want to talk about public health and let you know what we do. So we do a lot of the work behind the scenes. So as I mentioned, the federal and provincial governments have asked all returning travelers now from anywhere in the world who develop symptoms to call local public health in order to get advice. And, we assess them and we facilitate testing for them if indicated, primarily right now at the hospitals, but in the future, it'll be hopefully in the community centers. And once they've been assessed and they've been released from hospital, which is usually the case because they're not that sick for the most part, public health monitors these patients. And they are to self-isolate at home, and public health follows up with them on a daily basis to monitor their health and ensure that they can continue to self-isolate and care for themselves at home. To date, over 90 people in the region have been tested and have tested negative for coronavirus. We have had one case. Public health has monitored them all. This is a sign that the health system is working as it should, because we want to try to detect the cases that may be coming into our region. We also do in public health what's called contact tracing, so following up with people who could have had exposure to a case, and depending on their risk, having them either self-monitor or self-isolate. We also facilitate healthcare practitioner understanding of the guidance that's coming down from the federal, provincial levels. And finally, this is a big part of our work as well, we provide information and respond to queries from the general public as well as many, many groups. School communities, school boards, universities, colleges, business groups, municipalities, healthcare partners, first responders, community agencies, etc. So a large part of our work is keeping them updated about, what's going on and what we recommend. So I'm going to go now to preparing for the future. So we talked a little bit about pandemic, what it is. I also want to explain what it is we're trying to do in a pandemic. So should we be in a situation where we have widespread cases in Canada, Ontario, and Waterloo region, we would be reacting in a mode that first and foremost tries to minimize the risk of serious illness and death, and secondly, tries to minimize societal and economic disruption. So those are the goals of pandemic planning. And the next chart helps to illustrate what we're trying to do should we have a lot of cases in our community. So the x-axis is representing time, and the y-axis represents the number of cases. So the big purple curve represents what happens if there are no public health interventions. If public health, for instance, isn't trying to track down the cases and monitoring them, and we're not testing, et cetera, what happens is that there's a big influx of cases, and that can overwhelm our healthcare system. What we're trying to do when there are many cases is delay somewhat the cases coming, into our area, and also delay the number of cases that appear. So reduce the spread. So that's the second curve that you see. And if I were to draw an imaginary horizontal line just above the second curve and use that to represent our health system capacity, you can see now why we would try to put in place measures to slow down the spread and to flatten the curve. It's so that our healthcare system can respond appropriately and have, some ability to surge as needed without being overburdened. So that's what we're trying to do. So that means that we're actually sort of in between two phases of the response. The initial phase, which I believe has been very successful in Canada and in Ontario and here as well, is we've been trying to prevent it from coming or delaying it from coming and containing it when the cases arrive. So most of the cases that have come back, in Canada have been travel related. So when we have a case and it's travel related, we have them tested, we have them isolated. That's called a containment strategy. But we're in a phase now where the situation across the world is such that we should expect that we will have more cases in Canada, Ontario, and Waterloo region, and we need to be prepared. So in order to be prepared for the local circulation of this virus, we need to start thinking about how we equip our healthcare system and our community to be ready for this. And so at some point, once there is widespread community circulation, the federal and provincial public health agencies will ask local public health to cease containment efforts, because that's very resource intensive, and to focus their actions on ensuring that those that are most ill and need higher levels of care get that care, while the rest of the people who have milder symptoms can recover well at home. So there's going to be a shift in strategy from trying to contain all cases to trying to make sure that we give the care that's most appropriate for the cases depending on their severity. So we're kind of in between right now. Sometimes that can lead to confusion because it can seem scary when we're trying our best to isolate all cases. But at the same time, I think that's been very effective, and we just have to now be prepared for the possibility that we will have cases, and I believe that we will. So the next slide talks about the health sector control group. So for several weeks now, in fact, since this thing has been declared, we have been working and regularly communicating with our healthcare partners, and it's been going really well. But now that we're in, a more enhanced phase, I would say, of trying to continue to contain this virus while at the same time preparing for the future, we have also formally struck the health sector control group that feeds into the pandemic control group that Mike described. And we have excellent representation from all the key sectors in the healthcare sector that want to coordinate well together and make sure that they're operating well as an entire sector. So we have membership, senior membership from the 3 hospitals, from paramedic services, from long-term care homes, from home and community care, and from primary care from the Ontario Health teams in our region. So that's Cambridge, North Dumfries, and KW4. We're very happy to have them. And in addition, I'm very pleased to let you know that this group is being co-chaired by myself, as well as the president of St. Mary's, who represents acute care, and a primary care lead from Cambridge that's going to represent primary care. So the next, or the last part of my recommendation goes into some of the key public health recommendations, like what do we recommend at this time? First of all, if you have traveled to Hubei, China, and Iran, right now those are the two countries, although that could change quickly and there could be another country added. For those people, when they return, they are to self-isolate, call public health within 24 hours, and they are to self-isolate until it's been 14 days since their return, because they represent the areas where there's the most activity in the world. If you have traveled to any other country in the world, when you return, you are to self-monitor yourself for 14 days. And if you develop symptoms, fever, cough, difficulty breathing, you are to call your local public health unit. So what can individuals and families do right now? The cornerstone of our preventative actions for this virus are going to be the everyday actions for preventing respiratory viruses in general. So washing hands, staying home when sick, covering noses and mouths when coughing and sneezing, and routinely cleaning frequently touched surfaces. These measures will continue to be the cornerstone of what we will employ when there's many cases in the community. It will be the same. So what are we asking people to do? We're asking people to practice those measures, and we're asking people to think about having a plan. If they or their family members should be sick, example, for a couple of weeks, and they have to stay at home to care for themselves or possibly to self-isolate. So, for example, people on medication should ensure they have a sufficient supply. They should consider having a couple of weeks' worth of food and other essential supplies. They should think about alternative arrangements for childcare or elder care. What should organizations like schools and childcare settings do? Again, they should take the standard respiratory illness precautions that we recommend for every cold and flu season. So, making sure they practice good respiratory etiquette and hand hygiene, making sure that when children are sick, they stay home, same thing for staff, and ensuring regular routine environmental cleaning of the facility. What should workplaces do? So what are we recommending to workplaces? Actively encourage sick employees to stay home. Send employees who become sick home. Emphasize respiratory etiquette, hand hygiene by all employees. Reinforce our messaging. And perform routine environmental cleaning. And another thing we're asking workplaces to do is to review their business continuity plans. In case they experience greater levels of absenteeism from their employees, how would they ensure that their essential or critical services can continue to be delivered? And, sorry, page is sticking together. So we've been getting a lot of questions about, well, what should I do? What advice do you have if I'm traveling or I want to travel? So here are the three key pieces of advice. One, check the Government of Canada's COVID-19 travel advice webpage, and the link is there. It's an excellent webpage. It's regularly updated, and it has the latest advice on destinations across the world. Public Health Agency of Canada just recently is also now recommending that all Canadians avoid cruise ship travel due to the situation internationally. And thirdly, if you decide to travel, check what your insurance covers. Better to check before you leave than when you're already there. I have a few more slides. So masks. A question we get asked often is, should I wear a mask to protect myself when I go out in public? So face masks are not recommended for the general public, except for people who are experiencing symptoms and/or who have been advised to wear a mask by their healthcare provider. Masks are not recommended for those without symptoms to protect themselves. For those not trained on their use, there is the potential of self-infection with improper mask use and disposal. In addition, masks can be irritating and can actually lead to increased touching of the face and eyes. And finally, masks are currently in short supply, so we are encouraging the judicious use of masks. And finally, we've had a lot of questions about large gatherings. So I'll start off by saying that when there is significant community transmission, recommendations regarding postponing or canceling large gatherings will be part of the range of tools that we could use. At this time, we do not have community circulation of COVID-19 in Waterloo Region. Therefore, we do not have evidence to support broadly recommending canceling public gatherings. This would not be proportionate to what we're seeing right now, nor particularly effective. That said, as we've all seen, the international and domestic COVID-19 situation is evolving quickly, so recommendations may change quickly. And because of the evolving situation, there's been a provincial expert committee that has been struck to work on providing guidance to levels such as ourselves, local health units, on community measures related to large gatherings. And they will be developing advice and tools for decision-making, such as risk triggers for when we would start to consider what we may have to do with large gatherings. So we're going to be monitoring for that. In the meantime, we know that individual event organizers may make their own decisions, and each event can be different in terms of its characteristics. If event organizers have questions or concerns, they can reach out to public health, and we'd be happy to speak with them. In conclusion, I just want to make a few comments, and that is, 1, we need to remain vigilant. 2, our actions need to be grounded in science and expert advice. 3, we need to continue to act in a manner that is proportionate to the risk. There are risks to under as well as overreacting. And 4, we continue to do this while we continue to plan for the future to be prepared. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I see Councillor Lorentz.
Yep, thank you, Chair, through you to Dr. Wang. Dr. Wang, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much for all the hard work I know you and your team have put in so far.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say that I'm glad that you're at the helm here, because I have quite a lot of confidence in you and your team, and I think you'll do very well for our region. I just have a couple of questions, and I guess I just want to start off by saying I was quite surprised to hear that we've dusted off a paramedic program or pandemic program from 2008 and are implementing it, and I didn't even know we had that. I don't think anybody around this horseshoe has read that whole strategy or document, but apparently we may be getting it in the future. I don't know. I just worry about what else is sitting on the shelves collecting dust that we might be implementing in the future or near future. The community assessment centers, that kind of interests me. Have we decided how many we need or where they're going to be?
Right now, we have been focused on actually being able to find facilities. That's the first priority. And then we'll be monitoring the volume that we see to see, how many we'll ultimately need. But it will take resourcing to staff them. So I don't anticipate we will have many. I think, overall in the region, we may have a few. But yeah, that gives you, that maybe is not a very exact answer. But, you know, it's something that we'll first have to set up what we can in the areas where we can set it up. And then if there's greater need, we'll look at additional areas.
Okay, and I understand that the situation is very fluid.
Yes.
It's very hard to plan for something that you're really not sure what the effects will be or when it will happen. Do we have some kind of a set criteria that we're using to evaluate or to set up these centers?
I'm sorry, a set criteria to evaluate?
For locations, do we have a set criteria?
Oh.
Are they going to be other people around? Are they isolated?
Yeah. So one of the things that we need to make sure are obviously the healthcare workers as well as other people that may be, coming to the assessment center are protected. And so, we're working with the ministry to ensure that we meet all the requirements in order to ensure that protection for other healthcare workers and patients. So yeah, so they're pretty stringent. And, working with them to make sure we meet them. So I would say that the main criteria is that it's a clinical space that, for example, doctors and nurses can easily work in and, easily see patients. We're thinking, for example, that it would be an appointment system that we would set up so that people wouldn't have to wait around. They could have a time, a date, come in, get tested, especially since what the community assessment centers would be focused on are milder cases. And so, I would say that the primary consideration is probably having a space that can be set up as a clinic.
Okay. So I guess the one question that struck me is, so we test people that
Yes.
feel they have this, and we find out that they test positive. So what do we do then? Where do people like that go? Are they isolated?
Yes. They are
And
isolated.
I'm thinking more severe cases than just someone that would, feels a little sick or whatever, and you say, just go home and
Yeah. In fact, anyone that's tested is not only, asked to self-isolate at home, but they're monitored daily by public health. And if they're too ill to go home, they're going to be monitored every day in the hospital.
Okay, so are we setting up some kind of a containment area where people, or will they just be going to a hospital?
No, they in the hospitals are following excellent protocols, and they're ensuring that, they're isolated appropriately, and they're not putting others at risk. So in the hospital environment, that's set. In the home environment, they're not, putting others at risk because they're at home. So yeah, so all cases, when they're tested, they're then appropriately isolated.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess my last question to you is,
Yes.
What do you need from us as the Board of Health?
I think this Board of Health has a history of being very supportive of public health. I just want to say that. And so thank you for your support to date. You've been very engaged, and I would just ask you to continue to be engaged and let us know if there's any more that we can do for you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Dr. Wang and to public health staff, yes, thank you very much for the leadership and all the work that's you're providing to our community, and it's likely this may get worse before it gets better, but
Yes.
We've been fortunate so far. There's just a couple of questions I'm going to pose, and really it's information maybe that we need to disseminate because just in general conversation over the last week or so, and this is really, or last couple of weeks, been really quite intense. So the seasonal flu shot that many people get, does
Yes.
it provide any protection whatsoever? I think there's some people who think it does, some people who think it doesn't. Is there any science on that?
Yes, that's a good question. So, no, it doesn't protect against coronavirus 19. However, it does protect you against flu. And so, if you have had the flu shot, and it's been pretty effective this year, so if you've had a flu shot, you tell your doctor that, they'll know, oh, you likely don't have the flu, or you may not have the flu. And so it reduces your chances of becoming sick and then having to go to the hospital, which reduces the strain on the healthcare system. So it's still something we strongly recommend people do.
Okay, well, I think that's a concern or a question that is posed and maybe needs to be answered.
Sure, we can add that to the questions and answers.
The other one is we know there's no vaccine available for it. It's being developed. There may be some international leaders who think it's going to be available in a week or two, but we know it's going to be a lot longer than that. But are there therapeutics that are soon to be developed or made available? And will those therapeutics be distributed? I'm not sure when they're going to be available. Will be distributed by public health, by the hospitals, by prescription? How will those therapeutics be made available?
That's a good question. So, no, there aren't any treatments right now, specific treatments. There's general supportive treatments, but there are trials going on, right? They're testing different types of medications for this. And when they become available, they would be distributed, I anticipate, through the normal channels. So, when they become available, I think it'd be a time when people will likely be able to see or their family doctor to get assessed, and then their family doctor would prescribe them these medications, or maybe through the hospital. It wouldn't be distributed by public health. It wouldn't be something, we do like a mass distribution of medication for.
So there's no pre-existing therapeutics available for this?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of questions and then a quick comment. Sure. Dr. Wang, you mentioned that there have been about 90 people that have been tested in the community, and they tested negative, which is great. I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of what the protocol then is,
sure,
presumably for the remaining period, either that they're feeling unwell and subsequent testing that may or may not occur.
Yeah. So if they've come back from an area of high risk, such as Hubei province or Iran, and they've been tested and they're negative, but it hasn't been 14 days yet, then they are to stay in self-isolation until those 14 days are over. If they come back from any part of the world and they develop symptoms, likely they'll be a candidate for being tested. And then, again, if they test negative, but it's not, their 14 days is not complete, then they will continue self-isolation until the 14 days has passed. So it might be a little, sorry if I'm not very clear, but in other words, it's really the 14 days, because you want to make sure, because of the fact that you can get this infection within 14 days. So if you've been tested earlier than 14 days, it doesn't mean you don't have it at all, right? So you have to wait until the 14 days has passed. And if you've tested negative and the 14 days has passed, then there's no problem. You can cease self-isolation. That said, if you have been diagnosed as a case, it's slightly different. In that case, you need to A, no longer have symptoms, and B, have 2 tests in a row, 24 hours apart, confirming you no longer have the virus. And then you can be released.
Thank you. My second question, I don't know if I was actually going to ask Mr. Stortz, but he stepped out of the room, so either you or Mr. Murray can maybe answer it. There is a communications control group, and that really is to bring the communication partners together so that there's common official, reliable messaging getting out. I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about the work that group is doing.
Yep. So great timing on Brian's part. The communications control group includes representatives from all the post-secondary institutions, school boards, hospitals, area municipalities, they convene by conference call this week. They've got an in-person, I'm answering for you, Brian. They've got an in-person meeting set up next week. And so they are making every effort to share information and make sure that we've got common messages and common channels to communicate that. There's a variety of ways they're doing that. Common set of Q&As that will be available on, it's on the public health website, but it'll be available on other websites. I think there's some discussion about social media and providing to all members of council some potential, social media interactions that councillors could use. So those are some of the things that are ongoing. Brian, do you want to add any more?
No, just that we'll send out some key messages to council following this meeting. So I meant to get them out today. That's what I was trying to find right now. But we'll send some material out to you post this meeting.
Great, thank you. And the last thing I really wanted to do was just express my thanks to you, Dr. Wang, and your team for the work that you're doing. No doubt the hours are going to be long in the coming weeks, so thank you for that. And I also wanted to thank you, Mr. Murray, for calling the control group together, because as we know, we are responsible in terms of the heads of council and the CAOs for emergency planning in our communities, and it's important for the group to come together so that we are working collaboratively together, as this region is known to do, not only in good times but also in challenging times.
Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a series of questions in no particular order, but first of all, I'd just like to make an observation, and that is similar to my colleagues, thanking Dr. Wang for the great work of her and her team, but not only in the region of Waterloo, but I would say right across Canada. The steadfastness in which medical officers of health and public health officials have been dealing with this crisis has been quite exemplary. There's going to be tougher days ahead, and we're sure that will continue. And when you contrast that to how it's being handled in other jurisdictions of the world, it really reconfirms to me why we invest in public services the way we do here in Canada. So thanks to you and your colleagues right across the country. I'm wondering on a couple of different fronts. Test kits, there seems to be some controversy about the availability of test kits. Is that an issue here in Waterloo Region or in Canada?
Well, there's a lot of testing going on. So, there could be times when hospitals are in relatively short supply, but they get their supply directly from channels put in place by the ministry, and the hospitals work closely together locally as well. So, if one hospital's missing some supplies, another hospital will help them out temporarily. So yes, because of the increase in testing that's been going on, there is a greater demand on test kits, and we can be in periods of short supply, but it's something that the provincial and federal governments are recognizing, and they're putting measures in place to make sure that we don't have a problem with supply going forward. But it is challenging at times, yes.
Yeah, so just the whole supply chain approach, not only test kits, but all the other materials that are needed to deal with this, the gowns and the masks and the seclusion procedures and all that. Is there a supply chain group nationally who's looking into this and helping coordinate the supply chain potential issues?
Public health is not really involved in the supply chain side, but we hear from our hospital partners that, yes, they have connections and channels, and, just earlier today, the president of St. Mary's was saying that locally, they get together with their partners in the region as well as with other hospital networks, and I know the Ministry of Health is very attuned to the supply issue, not only for test kits, but other supplies that they would need in hospitals, and it's a very active area of activity for them to continue to make sure that the healthcare system is well supplied.
Okay, so that's being looked after. I was also Just a couple of things, in your overview there on the slides and what to do and when you have symptoms to call public health. I just think it'd be important to put the number there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So call public health, but call this number.
Yes.
Something as simple as that. I'm also wondering, often you say the greatest population at risk is those that are over 65 and with underlying health conditions. So as a lay person, as a doctor, you may know what underlying health conditions are, but so I'm left to, so is that respiratory? Is it, what are the underlying health conditions that put you in a greater risk factor?
Oh, it's a great question, and it's a great point. We should explain that a bit better. So it's all the conditions that, can affect your respiratory system, but also your heart and circulatory system. So people that have heart issues, people that have lung issues, people that have diabetes, people that have illnesses that already kind of make them relatively compromised.
Okay.
And that's what we mean by underlying conditions.
All right. So I just think from a layperson's perspective, it may make sense just to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Well,
sure. And then also when you say monitor daily,
yes.
So when people are in self-isolation and you're monitoring daily,
Yes.
Is that through the phone or how are they being monitored daily?
Yes, they're being monitored through daily calls.
Daily call.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then finally, and this is something that, obviously, as someone who's observing this and watching it unfold, and I realize that we're still in the containment process. So I'm just wondering, when I see the news footage and everything, if we're still in containment, what's been the approach or the thinking with public health officials on how we're managing containment in airports, for example? So, we have an airport here, there's, Pearson Airport, thousands of people still landing daily. It just strikes me as just, a casual kind of guy, like why aren't we testing people when they're getting off planes?
So the airports and any other border type services, they are under the jurisdiction of the federal government. So decisions related to what will be done to screen returning travelers, they're really being decided by the federal government. So, we get updated about what their actions are, and then, when they come into our region, that's when they become under our jurisdiction, and that's what we have control over.
So any containment strategies at Waterloo Regional Airport are the jurisdiction of the federal government?
It's not considered an airport where we would, no, Waterloo Region is not under the jurisdiction, you're right, it's the international airports, because they would generally be flying in through Pearson, for example, or from the Vancouver airport, the federal government, and the types of screening that are put in place are generally put in at those airports. But my understanding is, in conversations with regional airport folks, they are getting the guidance they need from their associations about what they need to do airport-wise here.
So I just would, maybe that's something that maybe public health can look into.
Okay.
I think that's an important, and when you look at where our flights are originating and where our flights are coming from, I think it's something that we need to consider to help with containment. So if you would take a look at that, I think that would be something worthwhile.
Okay.
So thank you very much. I appreciate the work you're doing. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I too would like to add my voice to appreciation for the hard work of you and all of your team and the team that spans the community. Well done.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that we're going to hear more from you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have 3 delegations. The first is Kitty Corbett. Kitty, welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a Kitchener resident and a person who participates in lots of regional organizations and social networks. I'm also a retired professor of public health at Waterloo, where I taught health communication for some years. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is thank you for the work that you're doing on this. I completely appreciate how difficult and challenging it is, and how stressful and emotionally draining it is, or potentially will be, for all of you, especially the people directly involved in the public health sector and medical care. I want to advocate for community engagement. Oh, let's see, I do have some slides. How do I do this?
Oh, there we go.
No, that's not it yet. Here we go. I want to advocate for something that sounds like you may already have started, community engagement in preparations and response, to echo the need to flatten the curve of new cases and to help the healthcare system respond. I also want to bring a few voices to you from your constituents, both healthcare professionals and worried citizens. This is the buzz, what I just heard. The general conversation has been intense, so it may echo what you're already hearing. One of the real messages in it, though, is that I hear people feeling disconnected from the kinds of conversations and decisions that are going on in this room. And I'd like to ask you to facilitate or to link with at least a community partnership. Here's some voices from the public. The community is worried. People realize we may be facing a wildfire with this pandemic. And as we know, the Director General has just bumped up the language used and is urging us to bump up our response. Some people say, I'm not worried, or I'm worried for my grandma. Others say, please don't talk to me about that. But often when I've asked, I get responses such as this. They say, I can't get through to a person. I really want to talk with a person. I don't want to get a recording. I don't want to just be told, oh, go to your family provider. A lot of people are talking about group activities in the community. St. Patrick's Day, for instance. Why are they still allowing that, I hear? Some people don't trust the idea of treating the virus in our hospitals. I'm scared to go to the hospital because I could catch it there. Another concern, people are reading. They're online all the time and reading the news, seeing videos. I heard that Canada doesn't have enough hospital beds or enough ventilators or people trained to use them, especially if the people who are running them get sick. What if healthcare employees are infected or in isolation? I want to know what the plan is. Should I cancel my conference? When should we all stay home? And if they aren't testing, how do we know there is no virus here? How about, I would feel safer if I were in Korea. If you travel to the US or France or Italy, those aren't places considered high risk. Isn't travel to the US high risk now? That's what I heard from someone today. And then, of course, the Costco situation is just ridiculous. Healthcare professionals have responded to my inquiries as well. And one of the things I hear is, well, we needed to prepare yesterday. It's urgent. Some say Canada's response is exemplary, but many of the people I talked with who are physicians and others in hospitals and clinics would disagree. They expect us to provide people with information to alert us that there may be rapid changes in mitigation steps. And when those changes happen, or if, they shouldn't be a surprise. For instance, social distancing, sheltering in place, that kind of thing. If vulnerable people or healthcare workers get sick on a widespread scale, our healthcare system will collapse, is what I heard from one physician. Period. This is not paranoia. I'll extend her comment. We are over capacity and understaffed in our hospitals already without a pandemic. The last thing we need is a massive increase in people needing hospital admission and a simultaneous quarantine of healthcare workers. Another comment, tell the public that GP offices and family docs are actually not a good place to take symptoms. Okay to call. don't go. Family doc offices need to be kept for primary care. They're not prepared with isolation areas to keep people safe, or masks, gowns, goggles, or time. If you are a relatively healthy person with mild to moderate cold or flu symptoms and a fever, stay in your house. If you feel sick but not critically ill, stay home. If you absolutely need attention, go to a designated COVID-19 diagnostic or treatment site. The ER, if that's the only place.
Katie, you've run out of time. Do you want to?
Could I request another minute?
Sorry?
May I request a minute?
You've already had 2 extra, but
I did. Oh,
it goes fast.
It does go fast. Let me wrap up then. You have support from the community for taking strong measures. They may be unpopular or inconvenient in some sectors, but they are expected in others. It's okay to alarm people when the dangers are great, and if you yourself are alarmed. Trust people with facts and uncertainties. They have the right to them. And then for community partnerships and engagement, community partners can help get the word out, be supportive, advocate in areas where you may not be comfortable or allowed to advocate, and help extend your reach in terms of services and getting the word out. And then the last thing I want to point out is that there's an excellent resource for risk communication and community engagement that the WHO put out. Thank you. Thank you very
Katie,
much.
for all the time that you took to put that together and your thoughtful intervention. I have one question from Councillor Jaworski.
Yes.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm actually answering the question, was there, why do they still allow St. Patrick's Day? I can assure you 100% St. Patrick's Day on Ezra Ave is illegal, has been, we have 100% of our police force, 100% of our bylaw against it. We arrest people, we dissuade people, we do door knockers to keep people from coming, we fine them, we take them to the hospital. It's 100% hands on deck, all of our bylaw officers, we even bring in extra police to dissuade people. I can assure you, it is not an event, it is not organized, it is doing everything possible to dissuade and disallow that. There's 100% nothing.
I appreciate that.
Has been left unturned, including by the task force for the past 2 years.
I'm conveying some voices from your constituents.
Hopefully you can echo that response to them.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Kitty, you have the best name. I think Kitty Corbett, it's a great name.
Yeah, I don't think my parents expected I would be a professor with a name like that.
Thank you so much. Next delegation is Dr. Terry Polevoy. You too have 3 minutes. Welcome, Terry. I'll be generous as I was with Kitty.
Thank you very much for allowing us to come. I was sitting at my dinner table about 10 after 6, and I was rewinding the CKCO news, and that's when the announcement was made. I have several problems as a primary care physician, nearly should have retired 4 years ago, but I'm still working. We started observing the anxiety in patients 2 months ago. And we have 17 physicians that work in our 3 clinics. We have no supplies. We're not going to get them. People are saying we're going to get them. We don't have them. Supplies to protect us, the PPEs. So I'd like answers to that. Number 2, I was involved in the SARS situation, 2003. When I went to Florida and collapsed in a hotel lobby and was taken to the Cleveland Clinic. No one would touch me with a 10-foot pole in the Cleveland Clinic because they thought I had SARS. So I have firsthand anxiety from discussing these kind of situations. Today on TV, when I got home from Niagara-on-the-Lake, where I stayed the night, I went to the breakfast bar and I said to the waiter, I said, how come there's only 4 cars in the parking lot of the Queen's Landing? I don't know how many of you have ever been to Queen's Landing. It's a place where there's conventions and seminars. He says, well, on Monday, which was 2 days ago, a convention canceled. And I said, just in your hotel? He said, no. They have 10 hotels in Niagara-on-the-Lake. The only people I saw walking on the street today were students of Asian origin. I couldn't see their full face. They were the only people wearing masks. We don't have masks in our clinics. We don't have protective gear of any kind. And I'd like to know, I'll bring up the Ezra Street fiasco. I sent messages out to 3 councilmen today saying, why isn't there legal advice going on? Why isn't there a lawyer here? Why isn't anybody here from Laurier University to defend the fact that they're going to have this drunk fest again? I'm sick and tired of dealing with kids who have to end up going to the emergency room or come into our clinics the next day after having been on drugs and drunk. But now with COVID, it's terribly disappointing that we have no action from above. We have no czar. We have no sheriff. You may think it's funny sometimes, Mayor, but it's not funny anymore. University of Ohio State University, Harvard, Stanford, Michigan State University, and about a dozen or 2 other universities have canceled their online their classes in every subject. NCAA is canceling people going to the tournament coming up. There are professional baseball teams that have canceled games already. Why are we so weak in setting the rules down? Why can't the Ezra Street thing be broken up? So I'd like to ask the mayor about that.
Well, I appreciate, Dr. Polevoy, you're coming to share your presentation. The reality is it's council that asks questions, not the delegates, and I have given you extra time. So I would just say, as chair of the police board, this is a topic that is year-round. There's a collaboration, there's cooperation with Laurier, with the City of Waterloo, with the police board, and with police officers and actually even other police forces outside of Waterloo region to find a way to contain this. This is an unsanctioned event. It's not that anybody finds this amusing or anybody turns a blind eye. Mayor Jaworski has done an awful lot to empower his bylaw officers to dissuade them from coming. So it is not a sanctioned event. And I would propose to you that there is a local responsibility and a local reaction to local conditions. And some of those areas that you've named have had a very different experience in containment, and they've made decisions that they think are based on science and evidence in their area, and that's what we're doing. We're fully prepared for having to escalate the efforts right here in Waterloo region, but it's not up to us to start canceling large events. Individual businesses, individual functions make those decisions on their own. We have not received any word from the federal or provincial government dictating that we should disallow large gatherings right now.
What do your lawyers say?
Well, I would tell you that I feel that this is a health issue, not a legal issue. And you being a medical doctor,
It may be a legal issue if someone gets sick. That's why I'm here.
Well,
Thank you.
I appreciate your intervention. Rex Mohamed. Welcome, Rex. You too have 3 minutes, and I will be equally as generous to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before I start my clock for 3 minutes, I just want to request, I'm honored to have this position today, to be able to speak a little bit, but I've never had this position. I've never had the opportunity to speak with the council. Again, my name is Rex Mohamed. I might sound a little bit nervous. Just want to let you know, I've never had this mic in front of all these government bodies. I am a medical director. I owner and operator of several medical clinics. I want to thank Dr. Wang with her help and with all the emergency units and everybody helping out with public health. Because I couldn't memorize everything, I wrote a couple of things down, and I want to make sure that I say this. I want to speak whatever I have been dealing with the team I have. We have about 17 to 20 physicians in the area trying to see the rapid numbers of patients. So a little version, I'll try and stay in time. The COVID-19 pandemic is a case in point. we need to save lives now, while also improving the way on how primary healthcare workers respond to outbreaks in general. The first point is more pressing, but the second has crucial long-term consequences. The long-term challenge improving our ability to respond to outbreaks isn't new. Global health experts have been saying for years that another pandemic whose speed and severity revealed those of the 1918 influenza epidemic was a matter not of it, but of when. Now we also face an immediate crisis. In the past weeks, COVID-19 has started behaving a lot like once-in-the-century pathogens we've been worried about. I hope it's not that bad, but we should assume it will be until we know otherwise. There are two reasons that COVID-19 is such a threat. First, doctor would agree with me, it can kill healthy children, adults, in addition to elderly people with existing health problems. The data so far suggests that the virus has case fatality risk around 1%. This rate would make it many times more severe than typical seasonal influenza, putting it somewhere between the 1957 influenza pandemic, 0.6%, and 1918 influenza to pandemic, 2%. A second, COVID is transmitted quite efficiently. The average infected person spreads the disease to 2 or 3 others. An exponential rate of increase. There is also strong evidence that it can be transmitted by people who are just mildly ill or pre-symptomatic. Third, the means of COVID-19 will be much harder to contain than the MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and SARS, which were spread much less efficiently and only by symptomatic people. In fact, COVID-19 has already caused 10 times as many cases as SARS in a quarter of the time. So the reason I'm here today is 10 minutes before 7 o'clock, I received a phone call that this council is going to sit. My request is, I see first, we can put everything in the slideshow, we can talk about it, but the practical is, and I welcome any of the council members to join, come to the clinic and wait and watch and see. Patients don't look at the sites. People don't look at the sites, and everybody is not following what has been instructed. We have live patients. In just today's case, 19 people from all my clinics, hourly I get updates. I had to put my phone on airplane mode because people are calling me. Our clinics are 7 days operation now. 19 people were sent for potential screening for COVID-19. We have 0 equipment in the clinic. And it's not for my protection. The people who work with me are my family, my doctors, my staff. Everybody questions me. And when I call the emergency logistics team, which is supposed to be supporting the team or supporting the primary care physician, the answer I get is a very political answer. And I don't even understand how to respond to that. I get lengthy emails because somebody's sitting behind the desk and has a lot of time to type. But then there is a person like me or every other person working with us that in yesterday's case, I stayed 4 hours contacting every possible agency, hospitals, and nobody is able to assist us with equipment or proper guidance of how do we stop screening or how do we divert that patient for potential screening when there is another person who is there just for their prescription refill. We have international travel students. We're situated between almost 20,000+ international students. And everybody who comes into the clinic, if they have cough and if they read the sign saying, if you're 14 days or under within your travel epidemiology period, then please call this number and access Public Health Region of Waterloo. But they say that number takes forever to answer. And by the time they answer, they say, self-quarantine yourself. That's the summary answer they get. But the same patient returns back in the evening, says, I still have my cough. How do I explain that? There's no clarity. So I request, if it's possible, if there is anything can be done to change this, and maybe we can tackle this problem down collectively together as a team and as our community, it would be very appreciative. That's all, ma'am. I hope I haven't crossed the 3 minutes.
Oh,
Did
you
I?
took way over, but so did the other
Sorry
two
about that.
delegations. So, thank you very much for raising these concerns. I don't see any questions. I guess the one question that I would have is, what is a more effective way to get the word out that people should be calling public health? You said you have a sign up, and what else can we do to let people know?
So if there is any way we could put a mark, if there is a separate clinics, which the doctor had suggested that there are several locations going to be hopefully starting, we would like to either put signs out or, like every other person saying, if there is a way we can send messages out to people who are international travelers to not enter the areas, contact certain telephone lines, which more operators could be available, not 9 to 5 employee, but a 24-hour line where they can seek some guidance. Hospitals to assign clarity saying this would be the route where if you feel any upper respiratory symptoms, you should head to this door. Even if they come to us, we can direct them, and with the support when we have proper equipment to be able to communicate with them. As we speak, we don't have equipment to even talk to them, but we cannot refuse them. We cannot ask them to leave the clinic overnight. I personally took the initiative on myself, and I made a referral form where a physician will not have to sit one-on-one to ask the questions. So there will be a checklist where a patient actually identifies himself, whether they have any symptoms or not, and if they check more than 2 answers, then automatically they will get the understanding that this is qualifying for them to self-quarantine or to head to the hospital, so they don't have to talk to anybody.
I do have a question from Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. If I understand you correctly, so you're saying they're having difficulty getting through, and so maybe instead of just putting the health line down, we put the regional 24/7 line down as well. And again, I like the idea that them calling and you doing the checklist, and then they can self-quarantine. I think people are scared. And a lot of people do have just colds or coughs, but it doesn't calm anybody's fears. So being sort of guided and talking to somebody is essential. And if I like that idea about a checklist, and if they have 2 or 3, then they know to self-quarantine. And maybe they just need a little guidance on the things to do and how long to do it. And also their name has to go on to the public health list, because then they will be followed up by the public health and checked regularly to ensure that either they're getting better or they need to be dealt with differently. But I did like that checklist thing, and maybe we can put the 24/7 line up instead, which will give them someone to talk to rather than a recording.
That is a wonderful idea, Madam.
Dr. Wang, sorry, would you like to speak to the online response and the fact whether or not it's a real person?
So the number that we give is actually our Service First call center number, and they get a live person, and then if it's about coronavirus, they will get routed to to the team in public health that takes those calls. Now we do have a 24/7 emergency response. However, if it's people sort of asking questions that are not of a more urgent nature, we don't have somebody like a nurse responding 24 hours a day to potential questions about that. If it's, for instance, between midnight and 6 o'clock, the Service First call center person can give them some basic advice, and then they could, for example, call Telehealth Ontario, and then we would follow up with them the next day. So we do have a 24/7 system, but we do triage by the order of concern, like if there's real risk in terms of what they're calling about, as opposed to they just they have a question and they want someone to speak to right away.
Mr. Murray, did you want to comment?
I just wanted to add one really small thing to what Dr. Wang said, and I think it's also a response to what Councillor Strickland asked. The region has a 24/7 Service First call center, yes, and the number is 519-575-4400. All right? Yeah, so there's a number. We'll push that information out. That is info that we make available. So we'll continue to reinforce that.
Would I be able to respond to that if that's okay?
Councillor Foxton has
sure.
another question or comment.
What we need right now is to prevent fear from spreading. And it sounds like, from what I hear from the public, we're not necessarily achieving that. And if the call center could have a similar script, instead of putting them to the health line and getting a recording, if they could have the script that says, if you have symptoms, please leave your name and number, and then those who answered our call here can forward it to the health thing in the next day to have them respond back. But a person needs to hear, okay, you have symptoms. It does not mean you have the virus, but you do need to go home and isolate. You do need to wait, and you will be contacted by health in the next, would it be fair to say 24 hours?
I think we'll take that under advisement. Rex, I'll give you one quick last word. Thank you very much for your intervention.
You're welcome. So we do get physicians advisory, and Doctor and the Chair, 519-575-4400. It's actually a Bible for me now. But I took a picture on my phone. As per the physician's advisory, we were advised that anytime potential cases show up, we are to call, get further guidance. On yesterday's date, I have a picture which verifies 1 hour and 31 minutes I was on hold for a physician or for a nurse to speak with, 1 hour and 31 minutes, and I repeat that. And I actually raised my concerns that if 1 hour and 31 minutes is taking for us to actually, and nobody picked up, by the way. I hung up the phone. I only purposely kept that phone on hold just so that I could actually speak or show it to somebody else also. And I've expressed my concerns to public health and advised we need to find out another solution. As a citizen, I don't have to take this upon myself. I've taken the initiative that every patient who leaves our clinic for potential screening, now until the government combats on it and figures out a solution, I have actually assigned at my own cost, including myself, that we are, and my children who are in university, they are actually calling this patient and making sure every day what the status update is. So we actually wait for the epidemiology period, which is the 14 days. So if the person was under screening of day 1, we will then screen for 14 days ourselves, whether somebody tells us or not. Because even today, a patient was sent and was given the form and all the screening tools, they left and they returned back in the evening saying, I could not get any person on that phone. It was went to wait. And I understand they're busy. So we need to find out a solution to this. Thank you. Thank you and I think I'm across my minute, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're way over.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for taking the time, to all of the delegations, to come in and raise your concerns. It's much appreciated, and
Truly.
It's been heard by the correct people right now. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, ma'am. Thank you very much.
So colleagues, I would entertain a mover for the minutes of the previous meetings. They are written before you from A to G. Or we could hear from Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you. And just following up on that last item, I'm wondering if we can ask Ms. Albright, as she's responsible for the call center. I mean, we would have an ACD and it would track average wait times, longest wait time in a day, shortest wait time, and so on. I'm wondering if staff can take a look at that, get some information to council as to what those have been in the last while, and also what we can do. It sounds like we need to staff up if we haven't all been already, and get those, like, if those call times are accurate. And I have no reason, I believe the gentleman who was here, then we need to, quite frankly, they need to be shorter.
Certainly, we, through the chair, we do monitor the call times and we look at the numbers daily. So I'm happy to take a look back and speak to the manager of the call center about whether or not we're being staffed up as sufficiently or not.
Councillor Strickland?
Just further to that, I'm not sure if the issue is at the call center or is when it's transferred to public health. So I think that's where the issue is. So, if staff can have a look at that, and I would agree that if we need to hire people on a temporary basis to help with call volume, we should do that, and we should do that as soon as possible.
Agreed, thank you. So, previous minutes of the meetings, A to G, do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Communications you received electronically, but councillors, I would like to draw your attention to page 4B and the fact that it was a release announcing the 2 new deputy chiefs who have been appointed at Waterloo Regional Police Services, and point out they are outstanding candidates, and thank my colleagues, Mayor Shantz and Councillor Kiefer. It was a very tough process. We had outstanding candidates, and Superintendent Shirley Hilton is the first female deputy chief in the history of Waterloo Regional Police, and Mark Crowell is also an outstanding candidate. They both start in those roles on April 1st, and this community will continue to be well served by our police services. Motion to go into the Committee of Whole to consider reports, moved by Councillor McGarry, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Financial reports, they're written in front of you. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Jowett. Any discussion? All those in favor? That is carried. So we are at committee reports. Planning and Public Works, Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've dealt with one item from the Planning Works Committee. A second item, which has to do with the UPass matters, the various agreements with the student associations. That particular report recommendation is being pulled for tonight, and we will be getting a subsequent report in the next cycle. So that is not part of this recommendation. And I'll move the remaining items, but I would like to talk to the one in regards to the archaeological work on Fischer-Hallman.
So moved by Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Shantz. Councillor Galloway, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, in regards to the archaeological work, and certainly it needs to be done, there's certainly been a fair bit of interest and concern voiced by my residents who use Fischer-Hallman on a regular basis, and the amount of time that it is likely to be closed. So there's a number of things I'd like to ask or question or get answers to as may be the case. So, and I believe Mr. Schmidt, I'm not sure if everybody received that email, Mr. Schmidt, in terms of some possibility of expediting the work, and that will
Okay, Mr. Schmidt, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, we were requested at Planning and Works to look at is there a possibility of expediting this work. We could expedite it, but what we're recommending at this point, because it's not just the work of the archaeological study, but also the work of constructing the culvert that's crossing Fischer-Hallman. That's the other big piece of this. This archaeological work is actually being done as part of this construction project. So we are looking at both of those taking a significant length of time. And if necessary, we would try to accelerate one or the other to try to get them both done at more or less the same time. So we wouldn't recommend making any changes at this point. But if during the process of doing the archaeological work, we see it slipping to be the critical path item, we would look at accelerating it to make sure it matches up with the culvert work that's being done.
Madam Chair, we did ask staff at the committee meeting to look at any possibilities of expediting the work. So this is as a result of that. There's been discussion with the, as I understand, there's been discussion with the firm that's doing the work, and there may be some opportunities which will be looked at as time goes on. But in any event, a couple of the other questions I have are in relation, first of all, to the detours. The detour is very extensive. There's really only one or two ways to go. We had Ottawa Street closed for even a longer period of time, actually, not that long ago. But I'm wondering if Mr. Schmidt can answer whether or not staff are looking at signalizing, temporary signals at certain intersections along the detour route, particularly at the corner of Bleams and Tressler, where I would expect, and others are expecting, a major problem in people trying to turn left off Bleams onto Tressler. Are staff looking at opportunities to provide temporary signals in that and maybe some other locations along the two detour routes?
So temporary signals are planned at two intersections, Huron Road and Tressler Road, and Bleams Road and Tressler Road are where we're planning temporary signals.
Okay, that's good. Then signage. A couple of us have met with a fairly major retailer in the area who is very concerned about the closure and the impact on their business, and I suspect there's others as well. And so I know typically, as I remember, detour signage usually just tells people, go this way, go that way. Will we actually have destinations included, like commercial destinations included in the signage, so that if you are going to a particular commercial destination, you would then know automatically, well, this is the way I go?
So all of our plans and all of our detours do have business information signs. So we do have a business information sign planned for this project. And we have staff have met with the particular business that you were talking about, and they're fully aware that this business information signing will go up, which will provide routing to their business and other businesses as well. So it's not just that one.
The next item is to do with pedestrian and cycling access, and I did raise this at the committee meeting. The detour route is simply not practical for a pedestrian, and even to some extent for a cyclist. Cars, of course, can accommodate them, although there's time involved. So I'm wondering if staff have taken any other further look at how pedestrian and cycling movements can be provided for, at least for part of the period, if there's any way possible. The other piece to that is that we have GRT service to the Huron Village area, but only on Mondays to Friday. And of course, people in that neighborhood have been asking for weekend service as well. Is there a possibility that we would be able to extend Route 33 for the closure period to weekends, so that people on the weekends at least have those who don't have cars at least have an opportunity to use a bus to get from their subdivision into the city or vice versa?
On the bus routes, I know GRT is looking at temporary bus routes, but I'd have to get more details on that, and I can get back to you with that. With the cycling pedestrian facilities, we would try to keep that open as long as we can, but with the culvert construction, the construction method, and that report has not been with council yet. That report is not coming until I think the end of or mid-April timeframe. That project will require us essentially to leave the existing culvert in place. It needs to stay in place in order to keep water flowing, to maintain the habitat, we would then put in half of the culvert, then put the water through that half of the culvert, then rip out the old culvert and put in the other half of the new culvert. And during that whole process, we would not be able to maintain pedestrian or cycling access across there. Before we do that particular work, we would be able to. That work would not likely be done until mid-July. Again, that's to match up with the ecological requirements of the stream and when we're allowed to get into the stream to do work.
Okay, appreciate that. Look forward to some response on a couple of those matters. Thank you.
Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much. If I can just build on some of the points that Councillor Galloway just made. I know in speaking with the ward councillor in that part of the city, Councillor Kelly Galloway Seelock, there has been a request that we look at the corner of Huron Road and Parkdale, Newcastle, in terms of the traffic signals. I guess they are identified as an area for them, and I know there's a strong feeling that those need to be put in place before Fischer-Hallman Road goes in. There's been dialogue, or sorry, before it gets closed. I know there's been dialogue between our staff and regional staff on that. So I raise that as something that I bring to your attention, Mr. Schmidt, and ask if you can follow up. Secondly, I really just want to reiterate the points around the importance of signage, because this business area is not only going to be dealing with a complete road closure this year, they're going to be dealing with a significant road closure again next year. Now, it won't be a full closure, it'll be a partial closure at different points in time. But they, this will have a significant impact on the businesses. And I'd like us to see if there's, anything we can consider from a, even from an advertising point of view. I mean, while they may not have a formal BIA like the downtown or the uptown did when we worked with them through the LRT construction, it is a geographic area that's going to be significantly impacted for 2 years, and so I would hope that we can perhaps go outside of our conventional box and look at some possible options in addition to the kinds of signage that Councillor Galloway talked about.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yeah, sure, we can look at some options. We can bring that back. The report for awarding this contract, I said, won't be till mid-April, and we can probably build that into that report or provide a separate update.
Okay. Councillor Lorentz.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Schmidt. First of all, I want to thank Councillor Galloway for raising those issues. I mean, it's being a ward councillor in the past on the west side, I received a lot of requests and a lot of concern from residents out there. So I appreciate the concerns that you've raised, and as well as Councillor Vrbanovic. The one question I have is, are we looking at Homer-Watson as another detour? And if so, what kind of traffic do you think we'll be getting on that? Because it certainly seems to me that Trussler will be the main line for people to get up on the west side.
The detour route that we're looking at is Bleams Road, Trussler Road, and Huron. That's the primary detour that we would sign. People will obviously use their own ways to get around. There are multiple ways people that can get around that, and I'm sure they'll make their own decisions. But as far as the detour route goes that we sign, that's what we're proposing.
Is that what we usually do on situations like this, is just have one route that we recommend?
That is generally our approach, yes.
All right. Okay. So this seems like it may be a bit of a fluid situation, and I would just remind you that there are 3 other directly elected people that represent Kitchener, and as well as Councillor Vrbanovic. So if there are some ideas being kicked around, or if you're looking for suggestions, I would hope that you would keep us in mind. The last question I have, and I know we've talked about this before, it's the access and egress on the 7 and 8, Highway 7 and 8 at Trussler Road. I know it's controlled by MTO, and I know we've been trying to get some kind of signalization in there, but with the amount of traffic we're going to be moving down there now, it's going to be a real problem. And I see that if there are going to be traffic accidents along Trussler Road, which turns into Ivory Needles on the other side of the bridge, that's where the bottleneck is going to be, and that's where the problems are. Is there any way we can convince the province to put in some kind of lights control there so we can alleviate any problems from that point of view?
Mr. Schmidt?
Yeah, we can, we can raise the issue with the province and obviously monitor it. So I can commit to doing that, talking to them and seeing whether there's anything we can do to deal with any problems caused by the detour.
Yeah, the biggest problem was when you come off and people are trying to turn left and they can't get across because of the traffic coming from Ivory Needles, and now Trussler will be coming the other way. So it's going to be a serious issue, and I hope that we can do something and possibly get something resolved before we put the detours in. Thank you.
Councillor Strickland, would you like to move Finance and Administration?
I'd like to move the one recommendation from ANF that is reconfirming our commitment to the Community Innovation Grant and asking community groups to submit proposals to see if they can receive the $50,000 grant with a focus on more affordable housing in our community. So move.
Seconded by Councillor Shantz, and I have just been reminded by the clerk I didn't have a vote on the last previous one, so we'll vote on this one and then go back to the previous motion. All those in favor of the Finance and Min? Opposed, if any, that is carried. Now we will go back to the previous motion that was moved by Councillor Galloway and seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that is carried. Community Services. Councillor Lorentz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 4 recommendations, and I've moved them.
So you so moved. Seconded by Councillor McGarry. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Any comments? Mr. Murray? I see no other matters under the Committee of the Whole. Oh, we do have another motion. Regional Clerk, do you want to speak to this? It says written. As the Regional Municipality of Waterloo accept the resignation from Tom Galloway to the Waterloo Regional Heritage Foundation and appoint Elizabeth Clark as the Regional Council representative until November 14th, 2022. Do I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, Tom, for how many years were you on that committee? 1994. Since 1994. And thank you, Councillor Clark, for stepping up. They're great people. It's interesting issues. I'm sure you will enjoy membership on that committee. Okay, try this again. Motion for the Committee of the Whole to rise and Council to resume. Moved by Councillor McGarry, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? That is carried. A motion to adopt proceedings of the Committee of the Whole. Moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Clark. All in favor? That is carried. I see no motions, no notice of motion. Any unfinished business? Any other business? I would entertain a motion to enact the bylaws first, second, and third readings. Moved by Councillor Jowett, seconded by Councillor Erb. All those in favor? That is carried. A motion to adjourn. Moved by everybody. Moved by Councillor Shantz and Councillor Vrbanovic. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you all for your attention. It's been a long evening, but a productive one.